Hello and a warm collisions YYC. Welcome to my guest this morning, Mr. Barry Poe. How you doing, Barry?
Doing well, Tyler. It's good to be here.
Oh man, thanks so much for coming on. Just for my guests, is often a lot of my for my audience, I should say, a lot of my guests are located in Western Canada, often central. You are in Vancouver, is that correct?
I am based in Vancouver.
Excellent, mandatory Canadian tactic. How's the weather in Vancouver today, Barry?
The weather, it's actually looking not to be that bad. It might actually, the sun might break out. So
because we're doing this in mid-October, so you're about to enter, I would say, a 5 or 6 month period of slightly overcast, if not completely overcast.
I think we're there, Tyler.
Okay, all right. The sun will be a novelty item for today. Barry, thanks so much for coming on. You and I met through mutual acquaintances, which is often how I meet the coolest people. Good people tend to know good people is my new thesis theory. But you are founder and CEO at Brilliant. So let's not waste any time. Let's let people into the tent or jump on the elevator. What is a Brilliant? What do you guys do? What are you all about? And let's unpack it.
So Brilliant is an AI company that helps businesses rewire their complex operations with AI. And really the genesis of the organization was just my recognition that that adoption of technologies like AI requires more than just the tech. So if you're going to be successful in adopting technologies like AI, you've also got to consider what that means for your organization. You've got to consider what it means for your people. And all of those things are often left on the table because everybody's so excited about, the energy and hype around the technology like AI.
How long? And because you've been in this game, I was, mCloud Technologies, HSBC, like that. I was reading through some of your bio, and like you've been involved in this game of technology implementations for quite a long time, probably long before the term AI really started to come on the table as it has in the last couple of years.
I was aware of AI long before it was cool.
When you read the history of AI, it's amazing from Turing right through to Linda Lovelace to like all of those precursors that made what is now possible. And some of the names that you kind of hear in passing that were working in the shadows for so many years. I think it's often underappreciated how long this journey, how long the AI winter had actually been.
There's a long history of computing. As you kind of point out, there are folks like Lovelace back into the 19th century. And then, of course, over the last 75 years, frankly, there's been the explosion in computing that we've seen. And all of that, I think, has kind of culminated to where we are today. So that's part of what's fascinating is I think most people are kind of maybe aware of what's happened in the last 5, maybe 10 years. But the reality is that the history extends far longer than that.
I got into an audiobook once that really laid through the history, and it was interesting, but it was complex. Like I had really had to struggle because it was so many names and so many individuals, but you saw them pull the way through, and so got acquired, and then they ended up over here, and then Google got involved. And it's really quite interesting. If you want to geek out, which is not what we're going to do today, this isn't a history lesson on AI, but I do think it's interesting when, like you said, it's so easy as a business owner or as just a citizen to go, oh my God, I'm being overwhelmed. This has come on so quickly. But it was the 75-year overnight come on quickly, right?
Everything is old as everything old is new again, right? And that's a pretty big part of what happens every hype cycle as people get super excited. They're like, all this stuff is new. I'm like, it's maybe not as new as we all think it is, but everyone kind of positions it that way because everyone wants to jump on the train and they want to be part of that story, which is fine. I think it's always important, though, to recognize that a lot of the stuff that we benefit from today actually started a long time ago. Maybe it only reached critical mass or got to a point where it was useful today, but people have been working on this stuff for a very long time.
That new factor, let's talk about that, because I just literally wrote down as you were talking, rewire complexity. And at the end of that, there's a thing called AI, but the rewiring complexity for organizations, how much do we get into trouble as organizations in your perspective? I'm going right at it because we get the shiny syndrome. We get the technology as the solution versus actually understanding what complexity even means for us as operating businesses. Like, I'm assuming you live right in the delta and paradigm of that every day.
So look, if you take a broken process and you add AI to it, the best that you're going to do is make it slightly faster.
You can break a slightly faster broken process, 100%.
Yeah. And of course, when you look at AI, I hear a lot of people talk about AI like AI is a tool. Or maybe at best, we talk about AI agents and we talk about creating AI systems. Those are all fine. I like to talk about AI like it's a fabric inside an organization. It's woven into your business. And so when I talk about rewiring business, it's not just about how do you bring more AI into your organization. This is your opportunity to really ask yourself, like, what business are you really in? And what kinds of things do you want to do in your business that maybe AI could help you with? because those things used to be impossible.
I love that talking about complexity. You and I were joking off air. I've recently read the Elon Musk biography. I recommended it to you. But the unengineering, the almost savage simplification that he took on of like, you can't prove to me why it's needed, then I want it removed. To the point that it almost looked reckless. But so many businesses, we build complexity on top of complexity and add another system to help support a system. How critical is it now as we're entering the world where absolutely AI is, it's here, it's coming, it's moving fast. There's a competitive advantage or disadvantage to be had. But how is this the time to be unrelenting with the reduction of complexity in our businesses first, before we ever then try to do poor things faster?
Oh, I hope that AI isn't the only reason that we try to reduce complexity.
But it's maybe just the current one, Barry. It's the current one. It's the current red flag of problems, right?
I hear you. I think complexity exists because people sometimes can't help themselves. Organizations can't help themselves, and complexity accrues over time. It's not something people don't set out to create complexity. I don't think that that's ever the objective, but complexity happens, especially as people realize that like, oh, I didn't have a full understanding of that problem, or I didn't have a full understanding of all the things that needed to get done. And so processes evolve just like organizations do. And when a process or a workflow has been embedded in a business for a long time, they can get very complicated because it's got so much legacy and so much history attached to it. The opportunity, I think, is not just to take a look at the process as it exists today. It's to maybe take a step back and ask yourself, like, why do you have this process? And knowing what you know now, how would you do it?
How would you do it differently? How often do you still encounter the giant spreadsheet?
Every day. And here's
every business who's been in business for any period of time has one somewhere in their history or now, right?
Absolutely. And I think spreadsheets, I mean, they've proven, they've proven how valuable they are given the fact that they're an invention of like the early 1980s. I mean, when you take a look at how people use spreadsheets, it's almost like email, like people use spreadsheets as everything. When you can't figure out how to write a program or create an application or have a piece of software that does it, you turn to the spreadsheet because the spreadsheet's actually almost infinitely flexible. You can do lots of things with it. And it's something that everyone can relate to. So it's a tool that everyone has. It's kind of like common knowledge in that way. And so super valuable. The challenge is when everything is in the spreadsheet, then it becomes really, really hard because it's not like a spreadsheet is a source of truth. It's just an artifact that people use to get something done.
Oh, I like that. It's not a source of truth, but yet simply an artifact to get shit done. My words, not yours. To get shit done. So when you engage with an organization, and we don't need to talk about, we'll get into AI, where it's maybe going, or kind of where you see some of the, as you look down the road. Hard to predict something that's evolving faster than the speed of most of us can think at. But when you get brought into an organization with like, hey, we want to use more AI, period. How do you then start to really unpack what is the way things get done versus artifacts versus like, and are companies willing to take that pause with you to do that work up front?
I love the question. And so I think a lot of organizations that I get to work with, they start with the question of like, how do I use AI to do X? And I'm like, well, the real question isn't how do I use AI? It's what are the most urgent, most pressing business challenges that you face today? Because AI, and I kind of look at it this way, like AI in a way is probably the least business risky of all aspects of transformation. Like it's understood what AI is, at least AI is today. And, we might have a view as to where it's going tomorrow, but the technology aspect of it is never going to be the real impediment. The real impediment is, and we were talking a little bit about this off air about authenticity. What is truly authentic to your business and what creates strategic value. And if you had the ability to wield a magic wand, not that AI is magic, but if you had the ability to wield a magic wand that would make the impossible reality, how would you create value for your customers and the market? Those are the interesting questions. Those are also the hard questions, by the way, which is part of the reason why a lot of organizations don't necessarily immediately come to them. They're kind of like, here's the low hanging fruit. Here's what's easiest. If I do this, at least I've proven that I've made a step forward. The challenge is that a lot of organizations, though, aren't going to find real innovation incrementally. They're going to find it because, frankly, they took the leap. right? They really did cross the chasm in that way.
I really appreciate that. And I've been involved in some roundtables or some discussions with very large organizations. This was years ago. And I went to sit in on, I got invited by a large IT kind of leadership company here in Western Canada. And they invited me in to sit with like Nutri and CP, like large players, to really talk about how they were using technology to automate efficiency. And I went in expecting to see kind of 10 out of 10 changes. But what they were really showcasing was, because their organizations were so bureaucratic and things took so long, they were pioneering the one-page business plan, the 24-hour approval, the automation of expense reports, time tracking. Like, it was all very small. But what I really appreciated and respected were these were large organizations that just getting out of their own way was kind of the first objective. Like, it took 6 months for us to approve a business case, but the technology had already changed. So, and that was like 5 or 6 years ago. So curious how that levels up to what you're seeing now even.
So I think that there's probably a long history here. And again, not necessarily specific to AI. If you kind of take a look, that is one of the fundamental differences, I think, between startups and small business versus large enterprise.
Okay.
You know, when you get into an organization that has been around for 10, 20, 30 years, there is much more of a natural tendency to want to protect the goose egg. You don't want to necessarily be in a position where you are putting at risk the things that
Betting
actually
the
feed you.
company, right?
Yeah, and that I think that mindset actually has, a large influence on how organizations behave and react to change. If you're a small business and frankly you're trying to make your way out there, you're probably more willing to take risks because frankly you need
Well,
to
you have
in
less to
order
lose, you have more
continue
to gain.
grow.
You have more to gain. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think that that's part of it. Is in these larger organizations, you've got teams that feel like they're actually charged with protecting the goose egg. They're not charged to go and transform the business. The reason that they're hired is, let's keep the organization on the track it's always
Yeah.
been, and let's continue to sustain its success. And so that is a different mindset.
Well, I was at a workshop recently, and they were talking about like what is true innovation versus what is often process improvements. And she really referred to it. You've got the police and you've got the pirates. And an organization of pirates is chaos, but an organization of police is we stay exactly how we are and we never change because we're so busy protecting the goose egg. What's the balance, or how do you see the power dynamic shifting when you've got small businesses that are AI technology first, and I'm throwing AI in there, but they are not scared to disrupt the status quo. But then you've got large organizations that, for good reason, sometimes because of safety, because of governments, because of environment, there's a need to not be like, we can't throw caution to the wind because there might be an environmental or human impact that's just not, and often a shareholder impact that we're not willing to accept. Are you also seeing those small to medium-sized businesses, just the ability to leapfrog because maybe they're not as hamstrung by some of those cultural elements that, again, are maybe justified, but could be causing more harm than good when you think about the long-term value that these companies are maybe not getting with technology?
So a couple of things. I think organizations that have that long tail of legacy, it's always going to be harder to get off the ground because they've got all of this attachment to what's been. And I think small businesses or businesses that frankly don't look at the past, they've got a tendency to say like, it doesn't really matter where things are. I want to know where we will be. Different mindsets, not necessarily wrong one way or the other. It's more just a question of, from a business's point of view, who do they want to be when they grow up? And that's a really important question. That legacy can be very, very difficult to let go, especially if your whole business runs on that legacy. And I think
Totally.
how you evolve it and how you decide when to let go of the existing legacy to try something new, that's a very important question because that determines the trajectory of the business.
Well, and there's so many examples in Canada that are easy to point at. The big five banks versus, a Neo Financial, for example, or many of the other, Simple, you could pick one. Just as industries that are like building on this legacy, tech debt, and some of those terms you hear floating around are very real. When you were innovating your technology 30 years ago, but you're still working off that same infrastructure.
So some of that is actually not even. Some of that is probably because, like, when you take a look at these organizations, and obviously I've worked in places like financial services, some of these systems are built with incredible precision, as in, like, they're designed to be robust. They handle billions of dollars of transactions every minute. And guess what? You can't just change it at will because you feel like it might
Nor
be
should you be able to, right? Or
you.
things would go horribly wrong.
Right?
Meaning the financial system implodes.
Right, exactly, which is part of the reason why, if you look at transformation is also a process of evolution. And it's a question of, not just when you flip a switch, but like, what does that journey look like? When do you transition from system A to system B? And what does that transition look like?
And based time back to who do you want to be when you grow up. So imagine, I always like to think about who's listening right now. So we've got some mid-level and senior managers listening to this episode, and they're on that like, oh, we're playing around with AI. Kind of, we've got individual instances, we've got team members playing around with it. We're going to call Barry. What are some of those questions that you ask them at the beginning to really get a read on where they're at on their journey, where you might go with them? Like, what's that first initial conversation with Barry look like? If I'm someone who's like, I'm really curious, I'm definitely motivated. Yeah, but here we are. This is what we got. We're maybe 10 years in. Like, we could be relatively small or we could be bigger. What are some of the conversation questions you might ask that aren't just size based?
So I think it's always fascinating for me to ask the question like, well, how much experience do you have with AI? What do you think AI is? And
Mm.
that's often a good place to start. I often try to learn a little bit about how they operate and how they make decisions. You know, like how data driven are you when you make decisions? And a lot of organizations like to say this. They've got like mountains of data, and it's like if only we could find a way to monetize this data. It's almost like it's like if only we could find a way to weaponize this data, like it would be like the most effective weapon on the planet. It's there's an element of that in certain organizations. The
Mm.
challenge is that just because you have access to lots of data doesn't mean that you can utilize it.
Well, this is drowning in data, but starving in insights kind of joke, right?
It is absolutely that. How your data is organized and whether it's ready to be ingested into AI and whether it's organized and harmonized in a way that actually makes it useful. That's a hard question because a lot of people, it's true, we do accrue a lot of data. The interesting question is how useful is all the data that we've collected, and is it organized in a way that allows us to act on it? So that to your point about
Allows
insight.
us to act on it. Uh, when you get into that conversation, is that a bit of a buzzkill? Because like, oh, we've got it all, we're ready to go forward. Wait a second, we got to take 6 steps backwards. Or sorry, the feeling that I might be taking steps backwards to actually get my proverbial shit together to be able to then maximize this imaginary value proposition that I have.
Different people react to it differently.
I
I've
bet
seen
personalities abound, right?
So yeah, I have seen people who are like, yeah, it is a little bit of a buzzkill because they're like, oh man, I had no idea it was this bad. Now I've got to go and spend time,
I
effectively
can't
refurnishing.
unsee it. I can't unsee it. Yeah.
There is that, and then actually, like, I also worked with a lot of organizations where it's the exact opposite. Like they've got huge confidence, and it's like, oh yeah, that's not a problem. Don't worry about it. We'll deal with it. And I can't say that one is necessarily right or wrong.
Okay.
Again,
Yep.
it's more kind of a question of like, well, what do you want to do about it? The reality is your data is in this state. Maybe your data has been managed a particular way, and now you want to take the next step. If you're truly committed to that change, we've got to go and figure out what is it that we're going to do in order to make sure that that data does become effective, and what does that journey look like. It's also not all or nothing. It's not like you've got to wait until your data is
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
perfect before you start doing stuff. It's how do you get data to be quote unquote good enough so that way you can start doing stuff with it.
And back to that comment you earlier about 1 to 10, 1 out of 10, or 10 out of 10 in terms of size, scope, impact, intensity, value of doing it. Do you take clients on a crawl, walk, run process? Like, does that just make sense? Like, let's bite off something that where we can have success, we can learn, we can work, and then work towards the 10? Or do you have companies that are like, no, it's all or nothing? And how do you manage that?
I think that does depend a lot on the organization. the Personally, I often wonder about the crawl, walk, run approach.
Mhm.
I think that there is always a tendency, a desire to want to start with the low hanging fruit. And so sometimes the low hanging fruit then turns into pilots or POCs. And you'll hear
Yeah.
this term going around right now where people talk about pilot purgatory. It's this place where all pilots go to die, right? And the reason for that pilot purgatory exists is because people get fascinated by being able to show incremental success. But actually, like the incremental success was hugely technical. It had nothing to
Mm.
do with solving a real business problem. And sometimes those business problems can't be solved with a simple pilot or by seeking the lowest hanging fruit. And I think that that's probably part of the place where, in an organization, where are those opportunities? Where are those challenges? And can they be addressed by doing something incremental, by doing something small, or do they ultimately require that leap of faith in order to say, like, look, we've got to go and take this leap because there are no shortcuts here. We've got to go and make this happen.
How risky is creating false flags because of pilot purgatory, because of picking the wrong thing that's like, oh, that failed, or oh my God, that was so easy. I guess it could go either way, but both could be false flags in terms of what your next decision is, whether oh my God, that was a waste of energy. We're going to shelve this for another 6 months, or we're going all in and maybe we picked the wrong. Like I can imagine that selection of how to start is so critical for how the organization learns.
Yeah, I mean, what you choose as your objective really does determine your trajectory, right? And I
Yeah,
think there are lots of organizations that like to say like, well, we'll do the safe stuff first, right? The stuff that's not risky
of
because we
course.
want to prove out success, right? Which is fine. The challenge is that, if the pilot that you've selected doesn't represent a problem that the organization or maybe your management or your corporate stakeholders recognize as urgent, there's absolutely no way that you're going to get the buy-in that's required to persist it. So pick a problem that is urgent and relevant and that everybody recognizes is like, if you could move the needle on this even like 5%, this is worth investing in. Looking for that challenge and then being brave enough to have the courage to go after it. That's part of the process.
I like that. Would you typically have like an organization, like let's use best case scenario, an organization that picks something urgent, picks something relative, understands the impact on the business? Is there projected dollar values tied to it? Do we get that precise about our attempt?
One thing that I like to do is I like to help teams and organizations be able to express what the business case is for them, and the business case doesn't start with the pilot. Like what do we want to go and achieve on the ground? It's
Yeah.
really tied to the balance sheet. It's tied to the income statement. Like help me understand, if we did this correctly and we did this well, we executed it well. What does your P&L statement look like? Right? Like, how is that effectively going to change the economics of your business? And can you measure that? Because that's where the real value is. Sometimes it's hard because there are lots of businesses that have, overhead and they're not quite sure why they have the overhead, or their business is so complicated.
Legacy stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. So that attribution can sometimes be a difficult part, but that's part of the untangling as well. Like what
Yeah.
leads to the cost, to the cost profile of a business, and then what are the ways in which you're able to leverage technology that allows you to maybe reduce that. And that's not always just about cutting heads. That
Mhm.
can also be about finding new efficiencies. Like, does it take you a month to deliver to your customer? Why can't you do it in a week?
Yeah.
Right.
Because the
And
revenue impact on that after 12 months would be monumental. Mhm.
Absolutely, and that's part of the eye-opening process for a lot of organizations that I get to speak with and I get to work with, is really just trying to understand, where are those opportunities, because they might be in places that are kind of in plain sight, but
Yeah, of
people don't
course.
recognize them because they kind of just walk by every day and they're kind of like, yeah, this is just the way things are.
As humans, we normalize so quickly because we've got so much data coming in. If I see something on the corner that's just always there, but someone moves it once, I'm like, wait a second, where's that umbrella? Was always been there. Why is it not there? Like we notice these differences so much more than we notice the repetitive thing. Eventually, it
It
just blocks out, right? Mm.
and it's happening right now, I think, as people adopt AI tools. There's a lot, one thing maybe I shouldn't find it surprising per se, but one thing that I find interesting is a lot of organizations have, at least informally picked up AI. They are using it, whether personally or professionally. So they all have some experience with it. Their
Well, and it's
experience,
also
though,
embedded in every tool that we're using, right? Mhm.
it is, yeah, yeah,
Google was
increasingly
trying to
so.
finish my emails for me before I ever signed on to ChatGPT, right?
The single click email, right?
A
We're
hundred
rapidly
percent.
moving to that.
Yes. Yes, we are. It's our agents communicating with our agents. So when the phone rings for you and you're the most excited, is it a P&L owner? Is it a CEO? Is it a board member? Is it a line manager who's like, damn, there's got to be a better way here? Like, I know it probably takes all of them, but you mentioned that conversation about we got to be able to tie it back to the P&L. And I can only imagine that if you can get that individual who also is close enough to operations to understand where value could be created, that feels like kind of quote unquote the perfect ICP for you to talk to. Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, senior leadership teams are, really, really valuable in that way because all tone gets set from the top,
Yeah.
right? As I
They
like
have
to
to
say.
champion it down, right?
Yeah, that is very important. Here's what I think is probably the most important quality. And it's not necessarily a title thing. It's strength and commitment to ownership. If
Hmm.
you're coming in and you're saying like, look, I need to be able to prove out something quickly because I need to go and make a point. And you'll see this because I've got lots of stuff on social media where I talk a little bit about this. There's this notion of like AI theater. It's like, do you just want to be seen doing AI, or do you really want to
I was
do
reading
it?
some of your posts this morning. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that part, that's actually like a really important question to ask. So some
Hmm.
organizations, I think they're challenged because like they, frankly, AI is a little bit of a nuisance more than an opportunity, because they're kind of like, my business was fine until AI came along, and then all of a sudden now you're telling me that my business is, has got to change trajectory. It's like, well, I don't want to move my cheese, right? So
Yeah, great reference. Good, Red.
there,
If
there's
you
a
haven't
there,
read Who Moved My Cheese as any kind of a corporate leader, just take 10, 20 minutes and read it.
100%,
Great
and that
example. Good reference, Barry. Great reference. Great reference. You
thank
took
you.
me back there. You took me back.
That is definitely a part of it. There are going to be organizations though that recognize that, like, if you're willing to take the leap and you're willing to go and do things differently, that there's a whole mountain of opportunity that might fundamentally change what your business is, but in so doing also change your growth trajectory. And that's the really interesting question for a lot of organizations is the leap worth the risk?
Is the juice worth the squeeze? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And would you say, if your, again, point of view, your opinion, as we sit in our armchairs and prophesize here, for that business who goes, everything was great here. Like, I don't want to change. Is it a non-negotiable, and is it just becoming more of a non-negotiable every quarter, every month, every year as we move forward in this, as AI continues to emerge and become what we're not even sure that it's going to become, but we know it's going to become something more than today.
I think it is going to become a non-negotiable if it's not already, in the same
Yeah.
way that computing is a non-negotiable.
Like saying you're not into computers or the internet.
Yeah, yeah,
That didn't work
exactly.
out. That didn't work out.
Exactly. And I think that part of it is what that means for every business is obviously going to be a little different. But the reality is AI is here, and get past the hype for a second. So like, forget about whether we're going to achieve AGI in like the next 5 or 10
Yeah.
years. It's not so much a question of, are we going to achieve AGI? The real question is like, in what ways is AI useful today? And in what ways will that usefulness continue to evolve over
I
time?
like that a lot.
And if we take a look at it from that perspective, we're probably going to come to the conclusion that yes, AI can do useful things today. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But like, how many things really are? The real question then is, how do you want to embrace AI in your business, and what does it mean for you to use AI responsibly? What does it mean for you to use AI in your business, and what does that look like inside your organization?
Appreciate that question. I had a funny little exercise this morning, and we'll get into like the risks and trust and hallucinations. Calgary has a mayoral race that's on right now, and I'm interviewing one of the candidates later today. So I was on my office computer doing a little bit of research on the candidate and who was in my ward, and then I ended up upstairs in the kitchen with GPT open, but with two different instances, with 5 and I think 4. And they gave me slightly different, they're slightly different answers of who is more aligned here and who's taking this position on policing versus social programs. And it was amazing. I was like, I said to my wife's like, well, what do you think about this? I'm like, well, I don't know, because both instances of AI actually gave me a slightly different take on this candidate. It was very amusing, just to really respect that there is nuance. And it's not a perfect binary answer. Go ahead. Yeah, I'm just. It was a fun little accidental experiment that I undertook this morning.
It's a great experiment, and by the way, kind of similar to something that I like to do, which is to feed the answers from one AI into another, and to ask the other AI about the opinion that this other AI gave.
I love
You
that.
get actually really interesting feedback. So if you're ever concerned about hallucination, one thing that you might do is you might say like, I got this response from somewhere. You don't have to say it's from AI,
Yep.
and I'd like you to validate this answer. And then you'll often see how the AI responds to it. And sometimes I've actually come across a couple of scenarios where you get these two AIs that are debating with one another, and they can kind of be passive aggressive with one another. That's almost like an emergent human quality that one wouldn't expect to see, but very human. Which I think maybe tracks back to the data and like
Yes.
where these AI came from.
I completely agree with that. I always think there's been a gap of this expectation of perfection, yet it's been trained on human thinking, which is imperfect. So how do we expect it to be perfect? Like there's this weird, well, if it's not perfect, I'm not going to trust it. I'm like, but define perfect in terms of opinions and personal views and, the way we process information. And because these have been trained the way they've been trained, as far as we know, how can they be perfect? How can there be a right answer when you've got nuance, right? In our world.
So that's super interesting because some time ago, I had the privilege of working with an insurance provider,
Mhm.
and this insurance provider, like I recall being in this meeting with some very senior leaders, and they were having this debate about AI, and one person on the leadership team said, like, there's absolutely no way I would use this until the AI had zero error rate, and then this other person came up and said, like, but why? It's like we wouldn't expect that of people.
100%.
And I think the part of the bias there is that we've come to expect that computers are infallible. They don't make mistakes. They might by design, but they don't really make mistakes,
Yep.
especially if we've ironed out all the bugs. The challenge though is that I think computing has actually evolved from being purely deterministic to being statistical. So
Mhm.
the responses and the feedback
Almost a
that
little
we
bit
get,
more organic, right? In a way, right?
they are, and in
Yeah,
fact,
yeah.
that's probably one of the big cognitive leaps that everyone has to make when they're thinking about AI, is that AI is not perfect, just like people are not perfect. But we, in the same way that we wouldn't expect that kind of perfection from people, AI needs to have proper expectations set around it as well.
Well, you made the comment about cognitive bias, and I think as leaders, as humans, we have to be aware of trying to catch ourselves in our biases when we jump to "I agree" so quickly. And technology bias, of that tendency to index on believing technology over another human. I've read lots about that. That's a very real bias in our society. And what you just said, nothing's right or wrong about the technology. Our bias towards it maybe needs to tone a little bit and bring, and I hate to use this word because it's almost a buzzword these days, critical thinking, comparing one AI to another and taking that little bit extra time. It behooves us. Like, we have no choice, especially as leaders. If
Oh,
not, you're just reckless. You're just
uh,
reckless.
100%. And by the way, like this takes me back to my early days in grad school. I think as a researcher, you're always taught to recognize your bias, and accept the fact that you can't eliminate it, that you can only minimize it. But that recognition that
But
you have
being aware of
bias,
it is the key to all of that, right?
100%. And not everybody is aware that they bring bias to the table in any judgment, but that's really important when you're kind of looking at AI as well. Like, what preconceptions do you already have about AI based on your experience with it
Yeah.
that are going to change and shape the way that you respond to it? That part of it, that's maybe a deeply philosophical, deeply personal question, but also very human.
But we're all a bunch of humans running around sorting through our stuff, right? Our beliefs, and we're being met with this technology tool that's more powerful than probably anything we've encountered in the recent history. How we show up to it does matter. I think it absolutely is quintessential.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And in fact, in a way, I think one of the interesting things, when you use AI extensively, like if you use a chatbot extensively, is how revealing it is about the things that make us human. I almost think
Yeah.
that is an observation I've had as people kind of start getting into AI. It's, how much does this really reflect on, who we are, how we behave, and what we choose to bring to the table?
Hmm.
Because AI, in a way, kind of exposes all of that, because in fact, AI doesn't even remember the last thing that you said, right? Like Gen AI anyway, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It doesn't even
totally.
remember that. It
Which
brings no bias
is
in that way.
so, I think you can't not talk about the human element, because these organizations still being run with humans that show up with all of their history and all of their rich experiences and all of our biases, to your point, and you can't eliminate them. So therefore, do I at least reflect them? What's your thoughts on, for somebody who might be sitting here going, this is risky. And I read something recently. They talked about, like, when the internet came on board, there was a lot of checks and measures. Like, DARPA developed it for military use, and there was a lot of safety precautions, and there was a lot of guardrails built into the internet. So when it got turned loose on society, there was a lot of check and measures in place that they prophesized that AI came on at a different pace with less of those checks and balances and less of those guardrails, which then I've heard create a lot of fear, especially in those larger organizations where risk aversion is probably 90% of the company's mandate is to avoid, like, to protect the golden egg. Thoughts on how you kind of, onboard that or talk about that with individuals that maybe, like, to a certain extent, they're right to question it, and at the same time, they can't keep themselves out in the cold. Like, how do we balance how this technology has come on in a way that's maybe unique to others in the past that have changed our world as much as, I'm just using the internet as one that we all can recognize is, we live in the world we live in because the internet exists, good, bad, or indifferent. AI came on at a pace that just seemed almost breakneck for most businesses.
Yeah, I like to make the distinction between being AI literate and AI fluent. I think that those two
Okay.
things
I
are
like
actually
that.
quite different. Literacy means that, you've gotten trained up in how to use AI tools, that you probably use them regularly and frankly can use them pretty effectively. That's great. Being literate in the tools is always a good place to be. The real value for a lot of organizations, especially if you are a practical leader, is that fluency, which is the ability to make a sound judgments as to like when you are going to reject AI. It's not about where we want to deploy it. It's where can you recognize that actually AI is not a good fit, or that the feedback that I'm getting from AI is in fact not good feedback. That part of it is really what makes a person fluent in AI, and I think that that's probably what leads to that. Is the ability to be able to go and say like, I am capable of using my own sound judgment, and so these guardrails, in a way, very helpful in terms of being able to make sure that AI doesn't do things that are nefarious or things that are unexpected. But that comes from the wisdom of being able to know like where are the places where AI can go awry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What would be nefarious in this case? How often, and you made the comment about even knowing when to use AI or when it's right. How often when you get into the complexity conversation with companies, you realize that actually there's an opportunity to reduce complexity, but actually AI maybe isn't the right technology to even use. I'm sure that comes up on the regular, that
It, it
it's not the hammer for everything, right?
It does, and in fact, one thing that I do hear is there are organizations, for instance, that want to do things so they bill and position it like AI, and actually, it's like it's not. It's like this is like an automation rule.
Totally.
There are places where the simple solution might not be an adoption of AI. In fact, AI might be contrary to what you want. Like if you need something that is like robust, solid, predictable, doesn't waver at all, you probably want something that's more algorithmic, something that's more
That isn't going to
rule-like.
quote unquote hallucinate on a Tuesday.
100%. You don't necessarily need to inject judgment, right? Like you just need to get this done. It needs to be done a certain way, and you need to make sure it gets done that way all the time. That's very important.
It's
There are
repetitive. It's
places.
repetitive. It's structured. There's not a lot of variables. The parameters are pretty tight. That makes sense. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And there are places though where I think AI agents, they become very, very handy because they solve really, really complex problems. Like if you take a look at data migration or the evolution of data architectures inside organizations, which can be notoriously complex for a variety of different reasons, there might be places where AI could fit in, rather than displacing and trying to transform wholesale entire architectures. One thing that you might consider doing is putting AI tools out in front of each of these systems and letting the agents duke it out almost. That's a way for you to maybe get a little bit of a sense of what's in these systems and how do you negotiate between these systems to get the information that you're looking for. That's emerging through
Hmm.
through tools like MCP, like protocols like MCP that are coming out that allow people to do stuff like that. That's where I think things get really interesting, is injecting agents into an organization to frankly pick up where people left off.
That's also, could I continue that sentence to be for tasks that are actually not the best suited for humans? High amounts
Right.
of data, repetitive, like a degree of monotony, but AI has no problem with that.
Right. Now, like trying to navigate very complex data schemas to try and figure out what pieces of information you need from system A and system B because you need to put them into system C. Yeah. I mean, there are people who do that for a living. And frankly, you can't just do it one time. You've got to do it every single time somebody asks you a question about the data.
Yeah, yeah.
And there are places like that where properly orchestrated, by the way, and this idea of orchestration, I think, is really important in this age of AI. That orchestration is what creates something strategic, something eminently valuable that maybe hadn't always existed before.
Which actually, that is what kind of how you start to define innovation versus just process improvement, right? This
Yeah.
didn't exist before. It's a new way that we've never done it that can unlock greater value versus, well, no, this is just a better way to do the thing we've already been doing. I had someone say that's process improvement versus innovation. I kind of liked how one often gets called the other, maybe sometimes.
I actually really like that distinction. I think that that is an important one. There's something about evolution versus revolution, right?
Yes, I like that. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. I was going to make some revolutionary jokes, but no. Give me some examples. Like, you live in the real world. Obviously, names can be changed to protect the innocent or the guilty. What are some of the conversations you're having with real organizations today? Is it terms of like things happening on the manufacturing floor? Is it more in the financial services? Like, where are you? Like, what's filling up your conversations on a day to day right now in kind of the quote unquote the real world?
Yeah, so I guess I've got the privilege of being able to work with organizations from many different walks of life, from the manufacturing floor to all the way to like the corporate back office, and
Yeah.
it's fascinating to see the the diversity of challenges that exist.
Mhm.
Like on the manufacturing floor, it's not a given that you can just plunk AI in and that AI will do good things. Like one, not every manufacturing floor has an internet connection, which can be a little bit of a crimp on being able to do stuff in the cloud, which is like where all these LLMs sit. So that creates interesting challenges. Those problems too, they're also very different from the ones that you might experience in the back office, which might be a lot more centered around being able to take large amounts of insight, like
Mhm.
research, data collected from customers, for instance, and then being able to process it at scale. Like, how do you deliver that efficiently? Very different from the floor where you're kind of like, well, I want my machines to run because I need to maximize their throughput. I also need to make sure that, I'm maximizing their reliability because uptime is the thing
Well,
that I'm most concerned
forecasting
about.
maintenance before it's required, not taking like machines offline when they don't need to be. I see. I just looked creeping on your LinkedIn. You spent 2 years as an advisor at Alberta IoT
Yeah, that's
with
right.
Brenda and Wilson, and yeah, I knew some great people there, and I really liked what Brenda was doing when she was involved in that, and especially in Western Canada, Alberta, we've got such large manufacturing with also these large data sets of kind of untapped value. I've heard often said about why not Western Canada from a potential of global leadership around these things.
Well, Tyler, I recall, when we spoke a couple of months ago, one thing that I mentioned to you, which I still believe is really, really true, is that, in Alberta, you've actually got kind of the critical mass of all the right talent. You've got people who are SMEs and domain experts in these areas like energy. And then
Mhm.
you've also got people who are coming up who are skilled, highly skilled in digital things like AI and computer science. And when you bring those two things together, I mean, it's kind of cataclysmic in terms of like the things that you're capable of being able to bring forward. And Alberta has all of the right ingredients for that. And hats off to all the entrepreneurs who are in the
Yeah.
province because that's really what's making it all happen.
I really appreciate that, and I am all in on Alberta and Western Canada in general, but I'm definitely all in on Alberta. And you're right, I do like that. Well, if like, why not here? Like, if not somewhere, if not here, then why not? What are some of the roadblocks that you're seeing in organizations? And I guess so much of what we talked about could be the flip side is the roadblock. But if you're going to look at an organization that is kind of stumbling over this or struggling to really get clear in their own mind, what are some of the things you see? Do you have kind of like top 3, top 4 things that going into an organization, if you run into them, it's not going to go as well. It's going to be
Yeah.
tricky.
The organizational red flags, right?
Literally, it's, it's
Uh,
it's it's consultant dating. Oh, red flag! I'm going to take the business, but there's a red flag over in the corner there.
there are red flags. I think investment is such an interesting word, right? Because like
Mhm.
investment implies that there's going to be return. Time scale of return is really important. It is a bit of a red flag for me when leadership says like I expect to see results in like the next 30, 60, 90 days. And sometimes it's possible to show signs of success. But if the
Little
expectation
tiny
is that
green flags, right? Yeah.
right. If the expectation though is that you're going to see strategic return in 90 days, otherwise this isn't worth doing. I mean, you've got to look at this almost with the lens of like a portfolio manager or an investment manager.
Okay.
How long is it going to take for you to realize value and how much investment is required in order for you to get it? That part of it, is sometimes a harder question. Sometimes people say these things, they like to be bold and like to be audacious, which is not in of itself a bad thing. It's hard when it's paired with the actual execution reality that certain things do take time.
Yeah. Okay. Beware the bravado without the substance to back it up, right? In terms of like just like the best laid plans don't survive the like reality.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All those catchy like bumper stickers that we've all read.
100%. There will be a whole new slew of bumper stickers, I'm sure, to be created over the next year or so.
I'm quite sure with the realities. What are the real green flags that make you super excited? Not for like I'm thinking about you as someone engaging, but that you're like I'm excited for this organization because they are thinking about this the right way.
I think people who have the courage to challenge themselves to do more. That is something that I
Courage
find
is such an underused word in business. I think it's really important. It's a great word. I love it.
yeah, I like look there.
It's
It's
required.
hard. It's hard to override passion, and I think that that is something that if you can find it in an organization, hold on to it because that's almost like your cultural moat. People who are passionate
Yeah.
about the mission and vision of an organization, and they're kind of like saying, like, look, we don't have to be tied to what's happened before because I can't change that. I do have some control over the path forward and where we are today. And if then organizations that are confident in that way to be able to go and say, like, I'm not going to be held back by what's happened before, that to me is always really, really exciting because it says, like, look, I recognize where we've been, which is good, but I'm also not going to be held back by it.
I love it. And we talked about biases almost a little bit as a negative, but you can fine tune your biases to positive as well, right? You can have a
Yeah.
bias. Yeah. Like you said, like, okay, yeah, this has happened. I can't change it. That milk has been spilled. Oh, but there's a whole new mountain to climb over here and one is not going to dictate the other. And I think that those are biases we need to foster as leaders and not just and make sure when we're getting caught on the ones that are holding us back and watering the heck out of the ones that are taking us forward. How do I nurture this inside an organization with a group of people?
Oh, and by the way, like this is also something I think is really, really important. Every organization, every person in an organization should feel like they've got a stake in the ultimate success of a technology like AI. I always, one thing that I do get asked from time to time is, should we have like an AI function? Should we have a chief AI officer? All really, really good questions. I don't necessarily think that you need to have a senior leader whose dedicated focus is on AI because AI is everyone's business. That part of it, I think if part of the challenge is there isn't like a lightning rod or there isn't a focal point where AI can run through the organization, sometimes it can be helpful. But what's even more valuable is getting everybody to a place where they realize I've got a stake in this AI conversation and I know how I relate to AI. And I also know that I've got a point of view that's useful and very important to the organization.
Well, I also, you and I were joking earlier about, the dictatorship, top down asshole style leadership versus what that sounded like. It was a lot more inclusive. Good ideas can come from anywhere. Often the people that are frontline dealing with your customers have ideas about process improvements that at the C-suite, you're just not seeing right every day. And I had a gentleman on CEO of a large trucking company, and they started with a top down kind of digital transformation and he openly on the show was like, we completely failed. Because we forced it on people. We told them how it was going to make their life better versus letting them tell us how it could make their life better. And I talked to them about 3 years ago. They completely changed their approach and went on a buying spree this year and bought 4 companies because he goes, I felt secure enough because our digital transformation had worked for the people that were day to day in the trenches doing the work, which then allowed us to scale aggressively as a business across North America. It was a great story of we did it wrong, we did it right, and look what it allowed us to do. And those types of stories are really inspiring.
Yeah, I love that story, by the way. And one of the things that I do like to talk about with organizations is how you bring skeptics on board. Like they're always the resistors to change in an organization, especially when the change is really big.
Yep.
I think conventional wisdom might say, like, look, you've got to earn the buy-in of those individuals and you've got to get them on board by, reasoning your way to get them to buy into it. And I'm like, well, that's hard to do, especially if somebody is entrenched. A better way of going about it is looking at how can I harness the skepticism to make sure that person who is a skeptic feels like they've got a stake in the conversation. And if you're able to turn
those
that
people
skeptic,
are incredibly valuable. That's what makes balance, or else we all run off the cliff hand in hand, right?
Absolutely. And I think the big part of being able to take a skeptic and to be able to say, like, look, you just highlighted 10 reasons why this isn't going to work. It's like, I'm not going to make this your problem. Help me figure out how we resolve all these 10 things and make the process even better. That can be a really, really powerful way to get organizations bought into, AI from that perspective.
And it's all about harnessing the different perspectives on your team, right? And that is the art of a good leader, is that you can bring those people together, whether it's the extroverts or the introverts or the people that see the negative first. They're like, what could go wrong? Versus those of us who have rose-colored glasses on. And
but by the way, it is easy to say on a podcast. Obviously, really hard to do.
I agree.
And it's really important to figure out, like, how are you going to go and manage that inside the organization? So contrary to popular belief, like, leadership management isn't dead in the age of AI. You can't automate that. That is something that requires a little bit of art.
With the pace of change, it almost implies that it's more required than ever, right?
It probably is more important, more than ever.
Let's take a few minutes at the end just to geek out a little bit. We'll go to Barry's AI corner. What are you excited about AI? Like when you legit put on your pocket protector and geek out a little bit. I don't know if that's still a thing. I'm so showing my age. Is it agentic AI? Is it AGI? Is it super AI? Is it the battle between the different LLMs? Like what gets you actually really excited? Just taking off your business hat for a little bit and just playing around with the technology.
I think the evolutionary journey of AI and whether it ultimately leads to like AGI or super intelligence or any of the things that you'll see in kind of the hype sphere
Yeah.
may be less important to me than fundamentally what I see as being the largest transformation in the way that people interact with computing systems that's happened in probably the last 40 or 50 years. Because now, frankly, we're getting to a point where we're exceeding, even the traditional boundaries of things like the Turing test and being able to go and take a look at like who's human and who's AI.
Yeah.
That to me is really, really exciting because, in a way, AI can truly become a partner to you, whether it's kind of in your personal life or your work. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be an assistant. It doesn't have to be the thing that overrides your own ability to make decisions. It can, in fact, partner with you. And so I get really excited about all these places where I see every day it's easier and easier for people to create agents. It's easier and easier for people to tap into AI to go and do things that, frankly, used to be inhibitors to one's creativity. Like lots of people have great ideas. Like we've obviously seen things emerge like vibe coding, where people, are entrepreneurs. They
Yep.
don't necessarily have a computer science degree or software development experience, but they're writing software. That's super exciting because, it used to be like writing software used to be the hard part. And if what we're saying is that that's the easy part, well, guess what? Maybe we can turn our attention to the things that matter most about creating successful businesses, which is like creating value that people are prepared to pay money for.
That's so interesting. I had an experience recently that I'll share for maybe some among us who would maybe label themselves as non-technical leaders. I was looking at a spreadsheet that I could see my team it was a month-end report. It wasn't resonating, it wasn't working. I was about to go, I'm going to rebuild this just as like a Sunday morning kind of experiment. And I said, wait a second, let's open up Gemini. Let's put in some fields. Let's ask for what we want to do. All of a sudden I had this beautiful visualization of data. And that it showed me the code and how it did it and where the variable fields were. And like 6 months ago, I would have never attempted that. And so simple and so junior. So I'm not praising this as any type of, but for me, it was a big leap forward to go. All of a sudden, I didn't have to engage my team. I didn't have to reach out to my CFO. I took the data, which I knew was accurate for a month end. And I just visualized it in a way that my leadership team was like, oh, okay, now thank you. It's not just red. It actually shows incremental progress. It actually shows the gap. It actually shows where we are. But just using Gemini Pro, I was able to do this and create a visually compelling, beautiful, but also effective visualization of data with goals and areas to focus on in an hour with a coffee on a Sunday morning, just kind of playing around. That is very talk about inspiration as a leader to go, wow, if I could do this, what's possible? And that was just a level of experimentation I did recently that so simple, nothing mind blowing. But I told a few of my leader friends and they're like, oh, I would have never even tried that. I was like, that's the beauty. You can just try it. And if it didn't work, you just close it. Like there's no risk, right? It was like a zero fail scenario. And I kind of had fun with it. It was very empowering.
Tyler, emblematic of your own commitment to curiosity, right? Like I actually think that that's really important. I think a lot of leaders are afraid of touching AI or having, more direct experience with it, partly because they're kind of like, I don't want to look stupid. I'm like, well, nobody's going to know because frankly, it's just
100%.
you and it's just you and the AI assistant, the AI chatbot. That's always a good place to start. And I think that part of it comes from just saying like, look, I got to go and learn more. I need to get up to speed.
And the freedom to experiment. And like you said, the creativity, and it's almost now limited. The other day, my wife and I were joking around and I was like, oh, if my Australian Shepherd played an instrument, it would be the cello. So I literally just went to GPT. I go, please do a picture. She's white with black. And I said to a few people, they're like, oh, how did you use a real picture of your dog? I'm like, I didn't. I used like 3 words to describe the way my dog looked. And it banged out this photo, like a very pedestrian use of it. But just the creativity and the joy and the laughter that we had, now scale that up to your business. I don't know. It's hard not to get excited.
It is. And by the way, like there is a really important skill that I think everyone is learning now that we have to get used to prompting AI to be able to go and get responses from a chatbot. clarity of thought and clarity of outcome,
Yes.
those are important skills, because that's that clarity that you have to communicate to an AI in order to get effective results, and of course, the more background, the more context that you're able to share, the better. But that clarity of purpose, that clarity of thought, that has to come from the person doing the prompting. It's not going to come from AI. AI might try to infer if you're not necessarily clear what exactly it
And
is
you
that
might
you're
think it's an
looking for.
hallucination, but you also sometimes have to take responsibility for leaving the gap that allowed it. But Barry, let's talk about interpersonal communication. What is the biggest myth about communication? Is that it happened, right? As a leader, what were you trying to communicate? How effective was your message? Did you think it through in advance? Like, I think that's a life skill.
It is. Communication is intentional, right?
100%.
Communication
Or it
should
should
never be
be. Let's put it that way. It should be.
It shouldn't be. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. And I think that's probably a pretty big part of it, is just recognition that whether you're talking to a person or you're talking to AI, that intentionality comes through in how you carry that message.
Years ago, I was taking some NLP, not natural language processing, but neuro-linguistic programming. And it was all about the effectiveness of communication. Something that they put out there, which I think is really relevant for AI, is the meaning of your communication is the result that it gets. And what I love about it is I can't blame you for misunderstanding. I can only take responsibility for being more clear next time. AI is a fantastic playground of you can just keep revising your level of clarity and you can keep getting a quote unquote better output. There's a lot of, I think, crossover benefit to that skill in any type of management, leadership, or just, at work, things get done when groups of people come together. Effective communication is a cornerstone to that. And if you happen to bring AI to the table, the same rules apply with this massively powerful piece of infrastructure, which is pretty exciting.
That resonates with me. And one thing that I will say about communication is there's a reason why it has to be iterative and repeated multiple times. It's because, like, frankly, your communication gets better over time too. And that, when if you've got to communicate everything in one shot, like, your likelihood of getting it right, I don't know, it's probably not as high as, like, when you give yourself the opportunity to do it over an extended period of time, like many times over. You're going to get better at it. That's just the nature of practice.
It's like seeing a good comedian, then seeing them again and realizing that they've kind of got the same shtick, but they've slightly improved on it. They're not coming up with brand new material every time, everybody. They're refining and perfecting that ability to deliver the story, the joke, whatever. And there was a period of time years ago as a speaker, I was like, I always want to come up with new material. I'm like, but some of the value is actually just getting really good at delivering this idea and realizing that 6 times from now, it's probably going to be better than it was today, and sticking with that. But that was part of my learning journey as a speaker. And I had a friend who was a good comedian. I'd hear him tell the same joke 6 times and it got a little bit better every time because he was just working on his deliveries, timing, and that skill set I think can serve us well in business, actually. But not necessarily with jokes, but how do you effectively communicate that message to a group of people that hear you very differly, including AI?
100%. I mean, there's like a little bit of a stand-up comedian, I guess, waiting in all of us. We will get to a point where I think everyone recognizes that, the best way to communicate with AI, just the same way as it is communicating with people, isn't necessarily going to be in having, like, the perfect prompt at once. Like, it's just recognition that there's going to be learning, and that interaction is actually where that learning happens.
Which then allows that critical thought to not take a sideline, but actually be front and center as the person who's giving the inputs, right?
Absolutely.
Barry, we got a little philosophical at the end. I love it. That was a fabulous conversation. Thank you so much for, one, your honesty, your willingness to show up, and obviously the time you've spent in this space, kind of in the weeds, but also working with humans, right? Because it is another tool that can become the fabric of your organization. So we need to think about it in so much more of a broad term. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, learn more, reach out, have a conversation, what's your favorite form of comms?
You can certainly reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. You can also visit Brilliant's website. That's brilliantdigi.com.
DIGI.
Would be happy to pick up a conversation anytime.
And Barry Poe, super easy to find online, PO dash PhD, I want to emphasize that. So Barry, thanks for showing up. Thanks for having a great conversation. And thanks for the work you do, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Tyler. This has been fantastic.